I have never been a drug user. I drank once in a while and smoked pot years ago, back when I was a teen in high school a few times, and that's it. I'm 24 now, have a master's, and a well-paying full-time job. Yesterday I was walking through Washington Square Park, where I pass every day, and there are always people there looking to sell drugs. Not in the park anymore due to cameras, but it is well known you can meet a dealer and do the transaction elsewhere these days. They usually don't solicit drugs to you unless you stop to stand around near one of them or look like you're looking for something. Yesterday, I happened to stop by a row of benches to check some messages on my phone when a dealer on the bench to my right asked me if I need anything. My life has been pretty boring the last few years, and I feel like I haven't really lived, taken any risks, or done anything crazy, so I figured, what the hell, maybe I'll buy some pot. It's been a while. I said yeah, and after asking me several times if I'm a cop, he gave me his number and tells me to meet him at a fast food place several blocks away, and he will hook me up. I say alright and nervously check to make sure I have cash and go meet the shady looking dude. We sit down, and after hounding me asking me if I'm a cop, he asks what I need. I tell him I just want a dime bag, and he says something like, "Nah, sorry man, I only sell half ounces. You could take that, and I've got some coke and H." At this point, I didn't want to buy half an ounce of pot. I probably never smoked more than an eighth in my life, but then I started considering his last word, heroin. I've heard so much about it and how crazy addictive it is, and seen it in the movies and TV. I'm thinking The Wire here, one of my favorite shows, and it really started to intrigue me. I've always wondered what it would be like to do heroin. Out of nowhere, I say I'll take the H, and we do the deal there. I give him the cash under the table, and he slides me a small order of fries with the little stamped wax baggie in it. Then he tells me to let him leave first. I put it in my pocket, then nervously race home, my heart racing, cannot believe what I just did. I held on to the bag in my pocket, palms sweating the whole ride home. When I get home, I open the bag and dump some golden flakes and powder on my glass coffee table. At this point, I don't even know what to do. I know you can snort heroin, but it looked all flaky, so I try to remember how they did it in the movies, but they always seem to inject it in film, so I start Googling how to snort heroin, like an idiot, and do a little research on the stuff and how much to take. I used a card to get it into a fine powder and move a small bump to the side, which I inhaled through a dollar bill. I didn't feel anything yet, so I snorted a small line, which was essentially half the bag. There was very little inside. I waited, and in a few minutes, I had the most pleasurable feeling of pure relaxation and bliss wash over me. I just sat there, and everything felt amazing. I nodded off, and it was great. I had the TV on, but wasn't paying attention. I must have sat around for 4 hours doing nothing, but feel total pleasure. It was like a full-body orgasm times 10 that kept going on and on. When I would nod off, it felt like I was in a pure conscious, lucid, dreamlike state. Sometimes it felt like I was leaving my body. At this point, I did the rest of it and stayed up all night and must have been high for 10 hours straight. I might have slept at one point. It's hard to tell the difference when you nod off, and everything feels good regardless. Just the feeling of being under a blanket was amazing. I was blown away by the power of this drug and just how orgasmic it felt. I never understood why people did drugs before and got so hooked on them, but now I see why. I have the urge to do it again, but I will resist and not do it, at least not for a long time. I understand the addiction potential and how someone could easily tear apart their lives with this stuff. Heroin is pure powdered pleasure. I actually feel proud of myself for having the balls to do something this crazy, and I feel like it was a valuable life experience and my window into another world and part of society. I will never forget the day I did heroin. Now, ask me anything. Edit. Please no more comments telling me I'm going to be a homeless addict dying of an overdose now. Don't lecture me with all your misconceptions and lack of any real knowledge or experience about the drug. I understand if you know someone who's been hurt by it. We all do. Any drug can ruin lives. Please ask me questions instead of trying to lecture me, and do some research first before spewing lies. Update 2. I don't regret this at all, and I see a lot of talk about how cocaine isn't as bad as heroin, and people telling anyone considering trying a hard drug to do coke instead. I've known and seen a lot of heavy coke users, many who have become addicted and OD'd, and I find it disturbing that people think coke is acceptable because some higher class circles find it that way. I'm thinking the young Wall Street and college crowds here who associate it with money and being cool and is easily manageable to use for recreation, while society tells them that heroin is for the poor and destitute and leads to automatic addiction and suffering. So I plan to try cocaine the next chance I get and compare the two in terms of effects and experience. Doing heroin was memorable and life-changing, and I know I can handle anything once. I've done my research on coke and know the risks, so if anyone has any questions or opinions on that matter, feel free to chime in. Whether it is to tell me I'm a fucking idiot or to give me advice, whatever. This is an experiment and an adventure in life. I'll report back once I try it. Wednesday night update. Fuck, I'm still withdrawing, throwing up and sweating out gallons of sweat. I really want to use and relapse right now. I know I shouldn't. These urges are so strong and overpowering. Please help me if you can before I get the chance to. 1,000 comment update. Fuck my life. I wish I was trolling and this was all some elaborate lie. I was doing everything right, have been clean, and somehow a rumor got out that I had been using, and my girlfriend found out, and she basically broke up with me last night, but is now putting that decision on hold. I have some serious unrelated business and work I need to attend to in 2 hours, and I don't know if I'll be in any state to be able to and be ready. I can't stop crying. Fuck heroin, fuck my life. I guess I don't need to say that since heroin pretty much fucked my life for me in under 2 weeks. I just want to die. NA update. Went to NA. I shared my story and it seemed to hit a lot of people. I cried. I got a lot of support and numbers and feel like I'm in a good place and truly believe I never have to use again. I will be going back. Update number whatever. I slept for about 30 hours, sweat out my entire body, and now I feel okay. I also took a shit for the first time in like a week, which was pretty awesome. I can stop this on my own. I don't even think I need NA, but I'm not ruling it out. I have no craving or desire to do heroin. I'm sure some of you will be quick to say I need real support, and maybe you're right, but right now, I think I'll be okay. New update. I appreciate all the genuine concern and advice. I finished my stash, bad idea but too late. Threw out my needles and I'm too faded to respond to comments for now. When I sober up in a couple hours, I'll check out some NA meetings. Edit. I nodded off after taking another hit at 4 a.m. I couldn't be bothered to look at this anymore and just woke up sore with a headache. For those of you who think I'm a troll because I can do heroin and type well with good grammar, fuck off. It's not that hard if you type slowly and carefully without looking at the screen. The screen is a blur and too bright, and it's challenging, but I would rather post coherently than like an idiot. I know it's hard to believe someone dumb enough to do heroin is intelligent in other regards. Comments disintegrated into mindless bandwagon accusations of being a troll. I wanted to engage in a discussion and know I need help, and my mind isn't exactly right. I'll sift through the posts and respond to the genuine ones once I feel better. For people calling fake, is this enough proof for you? Do you want to see my track marks too? They're not pretty, and this is under 24 hours after first shooting up. I am not proud of any of this, and posted it here because I can't tell anyone in my life, and don't want to keep it to myself. I figured doing another IAMA would give me the opportunity to talk about my issues anonymously and help realize the extent of my problem through feedback. The assholes saying this is all fake trolling can fuck themselves. People can post being prostitutes and all sorts of things that harm a large number of other people, but dismiss someone on the track to becoming an addict who needs help and just wants to talk and maybe help some other people from making the same mistakes. I appreciate the people giving legitimate advice and asking questions. I'm going to the next NA meeting I can find. I know there will be a lot of people telling me I told you so and urging me to seek help, and they are right. That's all good, and trust me, I know the danger I am in of ruining my life, but let's keep this an AMA first and foremost. I will be checking out an NA meeting this week, and I know I'm on a fast track to becoming an addict, and I want to stop before it gets out of control and I'm physically addicted. No one in my life can know about this, and I want to stop before it's too late. I have been using for 2 to 3 day periods, then taking a couple days off, then using again. The breaks were in part to try to not get hooked, and in part because I had an unreliable dealer who charged me more than double what I should be paying. I got ripped off several times when I tried to buy off the street. My former dealer is the guy who I first bought from. Today I met a guy through some internet channels who said he could get bundles, 10 small bags of heroin, for significantly less than half the price my old dealer gave me on his most fair deal. He also happened to be an IV user and had a stash of sealed needles and supplies and offered to shoot me up. I had kind of hoped I would find someone who would, and he was a pro finding small hidden veins and injecting a bag in one shot. To quote Trainspotting, take the best orgasm you've ever had, multiply by 1,000, and you're still nowhere near it. He gave me some new needles and tourniquets, and when I got home I tried to do it myself. After not hitting a vein countless times, I finally got a red flag and was good to go. I have injected 5 bags since 4 p.m., the last one a little less than an hour ago, and I'm tempted to do one more. Ask me anything. Forgive me for any delays if I nod off. Ever since I was prescribed Duloxetine, my life has followed an unfortunate set of circumstances. The awful reaction I had to this medication is still causing me insomnia today, and it's been 2 months of living in this nightmare. This is the story of how Duloxetine ruined my life. Before I start, I need to emphasize that this story is not intended to encourage anyone to avoid Duloxetine. My goal is to forewarn individuals who are considering trying this antidepressant drug to consult their doctor first and discuss their biological risk of developing the horrific side effects this medication has evoked in me. Something I've noticed is that I am someone who cannot tolerate any reuptake inhibitor drug, so I should have known better than to start a new one. Previously, I was taking Wellbutrin and venlafaxine simultaneously. I then tapered off with Prozac, which resulted in serotonin syndrome. I quit methylphenidate because it makes me excited and angsty, and I am a recovering crack cocaine addict, which, for those of you who don't know this, cocaine works as a serotonin norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor, or for short form, SNDRI. Sound familiar? It should be, because all of the drugs mentioned work via reuptake inhibition, similar to cocaine. The reason I bring this up is because everyone I've smoked crack with can tolerate it better, and the duration of their high would last exponentially longer than me. Meanwhile, I crash really hard, sometimes really quickly. So thus, my theory is that regardless of whether it's pharmaceuticals or street drugs, I cannot personally tolerate any reuptake inhibitors. So, if you can relate to this yourself, use precaution when considering a new antidepressant. Ask your doctor about the mechanisms of action and educate yourself on the drugs that you're going to put into your body. And now, on to the story. To preface this story, I'm a 21-year-old male. I live in a country where hospital visits are free and medications are insured by the government for those under 25 years of age. I've been battling crack addiction for 5 years now. I quit 10 months ago, and since then, I've had about 5 slip-ups. I've been an addict since I was 14, and I've literally been to rehab 6 times. I'm currently on a waiting list to get into rehab. It has almost been a year since my relapse, and I'm still figuring this shit out. The story began in February of 2024. At this time, I had been on 30 milligrams of Duloxetine for a month, with no effects nor side effects, so my dose was increased to 60 milligrams just 5 days before my admission date into rehab. I've been adjusting and changing meds since I was 17 for my mental health, and on this particular day, when my dad dropped me off at the rehab, he noticed I was more stable than he's seen me for as long as he can remember. Boy, was he wrong. After settling in my room, I was ready to participate in the program. I found some friends and we all sat at a table together in the cafeteria. When lunch was served, I noticed that my appetite had vanished entirely, and I was repulsed by the thought of eating at all, but I didn't give it much thought. When I was in line for nighttime meds, I was very confident that my good old reliable Zolpidem 10 milligrams would warmly nuzzle me to sleep like a lullaby, as it always did. I practiced good sleep hygiene before bed, including showering, avoiding screens for 2 hours, making the bed, and taking my meds immediately before bed. After 15 minutes, I felt the Zolpidem's comforting effects. However, I was still awake an hour after taking it, which was unusual. At first I thought, maybe I'm just getting acclimated to the program, but soon enough, the Zolpidem wore off and I was wide awake, so I hunkered down and had no option but to lay in bed the whole night. I wasn't that bent out of shape or pissed off the next day because 24 hours without sleep isn't a lot of time to be awake for me, and I've probably done it 100 times already. Furthermore, at this time, I was prescribed a brand of 50 milligrams methylphenidate called Foquest, which has triple layer beads, designed to release 3 times throughout the day for a longer lasting extended release effect than double layer beaded XR medications like Adderall or Dexedrine. I was thrilled when the sun came up, reasonably so because I had been basically confined to that room all night. Once the wake-up call went off, I was free to go elsewhere, like the TV room, to lay down on the couches, or sit in the cafeteria to socialize with the early birds, and nobody appeared to notice I hadn't slept at all. My concern was amplified when I was still repulsed by my breakfast, but I went on about my day, attended all of the daily programming, and soon enough, it was nighttime again. "Surely I'll be able to sleep this time," I said. Anyone would pass out from exhaustion if they were sober the whole time like me. Nighttime meds came again, and now I was less confident the Zolpidem to do its duty. However, I was prescribed 10 milligrams diazepam and 300 milligrams pregabalin at bedtime on top of the Zolpidem, so at this point, I was relying on the back burner meds. Sure enough, the meds wore off after an hour, and eventually, I called it quits again, but I knew I had to preserve my energy, so I stayed in bed tossing and turning, just trying to sleep, but to no avail. On this night, I thought to myself, maybe I'm just going through weed withdrawal, although I hadn't noticed any cravings or anything up to this point, so it never occurred to me prior. As the clock struck 6 a.m., 48 hours had gone by without any sleep. When I woke up, I was at home. Now I'm 2 hours away in the middle of nowhere. Being this far from home, and even how far I was from the nearest hospital, I grew weary. I knew that I wouldn't be able to access the psychiatric care I clearly needed. Things weren't looking good this morning. I started becoming unwell with anxiety, and my freeze would keep kicking in. I had no idea what was going on and why the fuck I couldn't eat or sleep at all. This all pissed me off because I had fought a long battle of suffering and trying to pull my shit together for 8 months so that I can get into rehab again, and of course, it backfired on me. To fill you in on those 8 months between June and February, I was put on long-term disability with the condition that I go to rehab to maintain my job, which I already had plans on doing anyway. I found a rehab with lots of praise across my country, but the waiting list was 3 months long, so I was stuck at home on the rural back roads and spent all my time living a very sedentary lifestyle until I got offered a bed. When I got there, however, I quickly felt like I was in a labor camp rather than a drug rehab. I hated every day of the 8 weeks I spent there because of the sheer overexertion and exhaustion due to the intensity of the rehab. We worked from 6 a.m. until 9 or 10:30 p.m. every single day, with very little free time. Half of the clients at the place were on parole conditions, and the other half were what we called health beds. I wasn't on parole, nor have I ever served jail time, and when I asked the parolees, every single one of them told me the exact same thing. They all said, "This program is far harder than jail, and I want to go back to prison." Keep in mind, some of these guys came from medium security and witnessed horrible things, which I won't elaborate on. After those 8 weeks, I had enough. I was withdrawing off diazepam because the psychiatrist at that rehab tapered me down way too fast. I was also suffering from akathisia when I had to start an antipsychotic because I had an episode of paranoid psychosis due to the exhaustion combined with the entire dynamic of the program. They were making me wait forever to get the meds I needed for the akathisia, and they let me continue to withdraw even though I visited the hospital and they faxed them a prescription for benztropine and represcribed diazepam. I had enough of their bullshit, and so I left. My parents were furious that I quit, but I was determined to find a better rehab, one that didn't practice slavery and intentional sleep deprivation as their entire philosophy. And 3 months later, I ended up in the rehab where this story began. I was incredibly frustrated after being awake for 48 hours straight. It felt like the last 8 months had flashed before my eyes. I saw all the misery, hopelessness, grief, and loss that my addiction had caused over the years. Despite all the effort I'd put into overcoming it, everything seemed to be coming together, and my dad had commented on how stable I seemed. Suddenly, I found myself in crisis. On morning 2, I wasn't fucking around. No FoQuest, no relaxing with my eyes closed, and I powered through the day. It wasn't enough though, because all night, I still hadn't gotten even a little half sleep in. I was fully conscious the whole time. At this point, I proposed I go to the emergency room so I could speak to a psychiatrist fast, which is something I have had to do several times, but I was met with discouragement by my counselor. He kept saying, "This is just part of recovery." Then I refuted him by saying, "I haven't been smoking crack for 8 months. This isn't detox. This is my medication causing a crisis." I had enough of how oblivious he was, so I walked away from that conversation because he made me feel guilty for even asking such a thing, even though it was the best option, and I should have followed my gut instinct. My mind was so slow because of the time disorientation, and I became very compulsive. I was extremely uncomfortable living in my own skin, and my body would go into its freeze instinct. For example, I got into my room and had snowy boots, and I didn't want to track the snow into my room, so I just froze and stood there, staring into space, lost in my thoughts. It took me 30 minutes to remove my boots and rigidly tiptoe into bed. One of the rules of the rehab I was at was that you cannot refuse meds, but suddenly, in the blink of an eye, I remembered my doctor's words when he increased the Duloxetine from 30 to 60. He said, "I'm going to give you 2 30-milligram capsules, but if anything bad happens, return to 1 capsule." At that moment, I was in line to get my meds, and I realized that I'd factored out everything. It was very unusual for me to have appetite suppression to this extreme, and if the weed withdrawal was the sole problem, I would have gotten poor sleep or not enough. It'd be very unlikely to have resulted in complete insomnia for 3 days straight, maybe 1, but I'd end up crashing the next night. I did factor in the new environment, but only for the first night. Another indication that I had was I had an uncontrollable urge to crack my neck constantly, which is a side effect I have had from other antidepressants, and indicates the dose is too high or something adverse is happening. I told the nurse I was choosing to lower my dose without their permission, and she vaguely warned me, saying, "Well, part of being in this program is taking your meds." I just shrugged it off, not understanding what she was alluding, but I wasn't going to go through this torture any longer. This was on a Friday, so all the weekday staff in charge of the rehab left, and the weekend staff were there until Tuesday because it was a long weekend. On the 4th night, I anticipated a repeat of the same routine, and despite my efforts, I couldn't fall asleep. Instead, I felt as if I were hypomanic because I felt mental energy that kept my mind alert, but the fatigue was getting to me, and I ended up falling asleep at like 5 a.m., only to be loudly awoken by the PA speaker in my room at 6 a.m. And when I woke from this, I was sure as hell pissed off because I felt so much worse than before, but the good thing was it was the weekend, which meant free time all day. After the fucking megaphone in my room awoke me into shock, I stumbled out of bed, staggering, not so far as tripping over my feet yet, but needless to say, things were getting terrible given that in 4 days, I had slept 1 out of the other 95 hours. This morning at breakfast, I confirmed my theory that Duloxetine was causing these side effects because I began eating more and slowly regained my appetite. So, on day 4, I was losing myself after that 1-hour nap that destroyed me, but the straw that broke the camel's back was a song I heard coming from the next room over, and I had the worst panic attack of my life because it was a song that my evil ex-girlfriend involved in my last relapse would play while we smoked crack together, so, of course, it caused flashbacks. At this point, I had no composure left. I ran down the hall, went outside, and started hitting my head off a brick wall until it bled. I was stopped in the act, and the staff had to call the ambulance. I knew I was the most isolated hospital I'd ever been to when I arrived, and they told me they literally had no psychiatrists. Eventually, after waiting for a doctor, I had to explain everything all over again because the ambulance driver didn't hand off any of the info I'd given them in the ambulance, and I almost didn't get any help. The nurse walked in and said, "How can I help you?" I was in shock and didn't realize yet that she didn't know anything about me, but even after I explained that I'd been awake for 4 days straight because of a medication, she just looked at me and said, "Well, you seem fine to me." This made me really angry at the world. She just thought I was high since she knew I had addiction issues, but after talking with her and the doctor, I said, "It seems as if you guys think I'm high." They both just looked at each other, and from then on, I could tell they believed me. We talked, and I suggested we add 25 milligrams of Seroquel, so the doctor sent me back to the rehab with a week's worth in a bottle. After I got back to the rehab, it was time for bed again, and thankfully, I got some sleep that night. The sleep wasn't restful enough, so I was still loopy and anxious. However, I continuously regained my appetite, which made me feel better. The following 2 nights, I managed to sleep through, and my eating habits were much more natural than before. I was starting to think my sleep was returning to normal. I began feeling like everything would be okay, but when I got up Tuesday morning, after 7 days of torture, I thought I had suffered enough. I was wrong because the staff in charge returned, and they concluded that I needed to be medically discharged from the rehab, and I had 15 minutes to gather my shit and leave. I was under the impression I could reapply when I got home. When I called, the intake coordinator said I had to wait 3 months before reapplying. After hearing this, I felt hopeless, so I started digging. I discovered that I could call the clinical director of the rehab and make a formal complaint, so I called her up, and after I explained how much I wanted to return, she decided that all I would need to reapply would be a note from my doctor explaining that I'm medically stable on my meds. I was thrilled to hear this, and furthermore, I didn't have any problem sleeping anymore, so I was confident that I'd get the letter I needed to return. When I called my doctor, I didn't need Seroquel anymore because my sleep had returned to normal. I was having a lot of agitation and discomfort, so my doctor switched me from diazepam to clonazepam to give me the best opportunity for success upon returning to rehab. I don't remember the following 9 days after, but on March 2nd, it hit me again, and I could no longer sleep without medication, nor could I eat anything without forcing myself. In a sleep-deprived state the next day, I made the poor decision to go into my parents' closet where they hid medication and stole 15 10-milligram diazepams. So that night I took 90 milligrams just so I could sleep. The next night rolled around and I took 60 milligrams and couldn't sleep at all. My grandfather lives next door and has always been helpful to me when I have insomnia. He sometimes would give me 15 milligrams of oxazepam, so I went home and took it and just sat there and still couldn't sleep. In a drunken state from all the benzos, I lost my inhibitions, had enough of the insomnia, and was ready to die for the first time in my life. I decided I was ready and attempted to gulp back all my pills, knowing I would end up in a coma or dead. I found over 2 months worth of pregabalin. I take 600 per day, so there were approximately 35 grams. There were also about 150 milligrams of diazepam that hadn't been returned to the pharmacy, a month's worth of clonazepam, so about 45 milligrams. I had probably 500 milligrams of methylphenidate and maybe 100 milligrams of zolpidem and some other stuff I can't remember. I had to get past my mom first because she was in the way of the closet, so I walked by casually, grabbed the bag, and tried to get past her. She gripped it, and I didn't want to be aggressive with my mom, so I let go. She was traumatized by my behavior and quickly dialed 911. I was so remorseful for what I did to her, so I jumped over the railing down a flight of stairs, but landed on my one foot and just fell up the stairs and was barely injured. When I got to the hospital, they ended up giving me 50 milligrams of Seroquel, and somehow, I managed to fall asleep. When I woke up, they contacted my parents, and they didn't want me to come home and needed a break, so I went directly to a crisis center from the hospital. The center I was in was for people at risk of homelessness or just for crisis support. It's a nice house with a beautiful kitchen. I could even bring my nicotine vape with me. They also had lock boxes for people to store their drugs in. The only rule was you had to leave the property to get high, and you could come back tweaking balls if you wanted to. When I arrived, I was so drugged up from all the benzos that I stumbled around everywhere and had to use the elevator. The first night was pretty easy, even though I didn't sleep because I could vape outside whenever I wanted, and other people were awake all night that I could talk to. This made it much easier to remain calm since I wasn't confined to my room this time. My doctor was away for the week, so out of the kindness and love in my dad's heart, he took me to a walk-in clinic to get some trazodone. The clinic doctor only gave me 25 milligrams, which was not nearly enough because by this point, my sleep threshold was substantially higher. That night, I combined it with 2.5 milligrams of clonazepam and zolpidem, but it was useless, and I stayed awake. On night 3 at the center, I managed to get 3 hours of broken up sleep from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. I was sleeping so lightly that I had a hypnagogic hallucination, which is a type of hallucination where you're on the cusp of waking up. It felt like I was on DMT for a couple seconds, and then I woke up. I had enough. I was skeptical, but decided to stop taking the Cymbalta because I was living on protein shakes and could barely eat a small yogurt. I was sitting at the table crying because I just wanted to eat. The environment I was in was very triggering for me, especially since I was a 20-minute walk away from my dealer, and I could return back to the center when I was done. So this is where the stupidity began, and I gave in even after 3 days of barely sleeping, and went to grab a 70-piece of crack. Even though the cops don't care about drug users in my city, and people can be spotted smoking drugs all over the place, I still felt paranoid about where I was smoking up. Whenever I don't have a place to use safely, I walk around downtown looking for alleyways or trying to find tents in the park where the homeless live. This time I wanted to be more stealthy, so I climbed up this mountain in my city with a stairway about 100 or so steps tall. As I walked up the stairs, my legs were trembling and I could barely descend the steps without collapsing. When I got back to the center safely, I was tweaking and could barely compose myself enough to communicate, and my fine motor function was fucked that I needed help opening the pills I took to calm down. Needless to say, because of my stupidity, I didn't deserve to sleep that night, but it's just unfortunate the hospital would refer me to such a triggering environment right after I left rehab early. This facility is not allowed to stop people from taking extra meds. You could overdose if you wanted to, and there's nothing they can do other than call an ambulance. Luckily for me, my dad only left me with the amount of medication I needed. That night, 75 milligrams of trazodone must have provided me with some sleep. I honestly can't remember, but after 2 days off the Duloxetine, I regained my ability to eat again, and I was eating like a champ. I had lost about 10 pounds, and I gained it back quickly. The last night I was there, I didn't get any sleep again, but luckily, someone was awake to keep me company. He had some good weed and the staff let us roll up in the front room. Then we could walk across the road and smoke up on the sidewalk, and we did that all night until I was ready to go and my parents allowed me to come back home. I ended up crashing at 4 p.m. off 50 milligrams of trazodone for 5 hours, and when I woke up, I took 100 milligrams of Seroquel and crashed again and woke up 13 hours later. The sleepless nights were getting to be too much, and I was having suicidal ideation, so I bit the bullet and decided to drive an hour away to the best mental health hospital in all of my country. My dad and I were worried that I wouldn't get admitted, but they did because of my suicidality. The doctor gave me 200 milligrams of trazodone for my first night, and I just became a complete zombie and laid there in bed for 3 hours. But then I got up, and I could barely even muster up a word and looked like I was slumped. Told a staff member I was trying to look for ways to kill myself. So they gave me Ativan to fall asleep. I didn't want to take it because my benzo tolerance had already skyrocketed, but I succumbed, and it actually worked. Every weekday, the clients all got to speak to a psychiatrist, and when we were talking, even the psychiatrist agreed that what was going on was perplexing, so we just kept throwing sleeping meds at me to see what worked. One night, I was feeling so suicidal that I left my room and started hitting my head on the concrete, and the hospital had to announce a code white, which is the code used for patients deemed dangerous. The only person I was a danger to was myself. I kept punching myself in the head, and they called the intensive care unit to bring a restraint bed and told me if I didn't take Ativan and Loxapine, they were going to strap me down and give it to me intravenously. I took the pills, so the restraint bed was brought back over to the intensive care unit, but a staff member had to be in my room that night until I woke up. On Friday, the psychiatrist and I finalized my medication regimen, and he suggested that Monday would be a good day to leave. I was so eager to go on Monday that I didn't tell him I barely slept that night. I'm thankful I went though. I wouldn't dare go to the psych ward in my own city because I've been locked in a foam room with a mattress on the ground, no pillow, a camera facing the toilet, and nobody came to talk to me for 5 days, with people screaming all night in the hallway. I hated those pigs, so every time I had to piss, I did it on the floor beside the toilet so the camera couldn't watch me, and I threw all my food waste on the floor. I stuffed my blanket in the toilet bowl when I was about to leave. They deserved it, and I'm very proud I did so. I traveled to the mental health hospital I went to because it's much more humane. Everyone gets their own room and bathroom with a shower. They have programs to go through throughout the week, and a big common room with a TV and tables and chairs where I spent most of my time coloring with the friends I acquired. It's been about 3 weeks since I was discharged from the hospital, and I have had problems sleeping every night since. I've constantly bothered my doctor with emails and calls to the office to change meds, but I'm finally at the point now where I'm on the waiting list to get back into the rehab I was discharged from, and I slept the whole night last night, which I haven't done since the very beginning of the story. I thought this story would end on a sad note, but things are looking up for me. If I continue to sleep every night, I'll be all set to go as soon as they call me. In the end, to sleep, I'm taking 200 milligrams of Seroquel, which is insane to me because before the start of the story, I was taking 8 times less than what helped me before the story began. I'm also now taking mirtazapine and Dayvigo for sleep, and I didn't need any of these meds before this all started. This is further proof to me that Duloxetine caused all this stuff to happen in my life, and here I am 2 months later. Still recovering. In 2018, my life seemed great. Me and my boyfriend were doing great. We got our first apartment with our 2 kids. I was on Lexapro for anxiety and depression for 2 years. I can confidently say I never missed a dose. I even took it during pregnancy. Well, I was feeling great, so I decided to stop taking it without any medical help. I tapered down by taking it Monday, skipping it Tuesday, taking it Wednesday, and skipping it altogether. First huge mistake. During this time, I met a pretty cool neighbor. We bonded over that our kids were the same age, 5 and 1. It was during the summer, so our oldest kids were on summer break. I would go to her apartment every morning and we would smoke weed. What I liked about her is that we would take turns smoking each other out. We would even talk about me watching her kids while she was at work since I was a stay-at-home mom. So one night, me and my family were walking to our apartment after a birthday party. She texted me to come over to smoke. I was kind of confused because we would only hang out in the morning while she was getting ready for work. I trusted her, she was my friend, right? Second huge mistake. After I got everything settled at home, I headed over to her apartment. She was out on her balcony and she didn't allow me to come inside, so I had to hop over. She gave me my own joint and didn't want any of my weed. She just wanted us to smoke her stuff. I started smoking, kind of weirded out with everything going on. I legit thought I was being paranoid since I was officially off my meds for a week. I don't remember anything after that until 11:30 the next morning. I don't remember going home. I don't remember getting to bed. I don't remember getting up with the kids. Nothing. I was FaceTiming my boyfriend while he was on a lunch break. For some reason, I thought he was going to ask me to marry him. Then after he made it clear he wasn't, I was convinced my stepdad was going to ask my mom. I started texting my mom really weird things. I thought my phone knew what I was saying in my head since it has the suggestions. After the call, I was on the couch with my kids and little sister, and I was thinking the TV was talking to me, and I was trying to talk to my sister about it, but I was freaking her out. Then my brain told me that I didn't deserve to have 2 daughters and my neighbor deserves my youngest. Mind you, I haven't really talked to this neighbor, just a hi bye since we had a huge language barrier. She had 2 sons. I remember my mind just racing and hearing everything. I was even hearing car doors closing from the parking lot. I was walking down my steps to the neighbor's apartment and I knocked on her door and she answered very confused, and I put my daughter down and pushed her into her house. I went back to my apartment and my sister was really worried about my daughter, asking what happened, where is she? I just stood in the middle of the living room. I thought I was replying to her, but I was replying to her in my head. The next thing I remember is standing at the neighbor's balcony and my mouth being so dry. I was holding my daughter and talking with the neighbor and her friend who speaks English. I looked over and saw my mom walking towards us. She took my daughter and started walking up to my apartment and told me to get inside. I looked at my neighbor and said, "Whose mom's is this?" in a New York accent. The English-speaking one laughed and said, "That's your mom. Go follow her." In my apartment, I was trying to clean. My mom was asking questions like, what am I on? What happened? And what am I wearing? I was wearing boxer briefs, a big Pickle Rick shirt, and no bra. I would never go outside without a bra, but for some reason, that question pissed me off, and I took off my shirt and threw it at her. She got on the phone and was talking to someone, and I asked her who she was talking to, and she didn't answer me. I'm not sure if I was really talking or doing that thing I was doing to my sister. It made me so mad that she was ignoring me, so I attacked her. Somehow we ended up outside and I hit her a few times and took her phone and hung it up and went back into my apartment. I attacked my mom with no bra and no shirt outside with everyone still there. Next thing I remember was a very dominant voice telling me to put my shirt back on, so I did. Then the voice was asking me what I was on, and I jokingly said, "The only drug I'm on is weed, if you know what I mean," and I hit his shoulder in a joking way. Next thing I know, I am face down on my couch being arrested. I was placed in an SUV police car. There were so many police officers there. I then remember my daughter sitting next to me, and it feeling so hot. This was July in Arizona. The cop didn't turn on the AC. I tried to get their attention, but they were all too busy talking to each other. My daughter was going to die, so I panicked and started hanging my head on the divider. After me banging my head, the cop finally came into the car and yelled at me to stop. I yelled back and told him he's going to kill my daughter. He turned on the truck and continued talking to the other officers. Next thing I remember was making it to jail. I was asking for water and they told me it was in the toilet. That really grossed me out. I drank until I almost threw up. I was called to a desk to talk to a lady. As I was walking out the cell, I came to realize I was the only black person there. I do have a Hispanic last name, so I freaked out and started screaming that I was a legal citizen and to take me home for me to get my social security card. Everyone just looked at me. I was talking to the lady at the desk, but I was so paranoid I thought they were going to ship me out to Mexico. She was getting irritated and said she'll have to talk to me once I calmed down. The officer told me to sit next to the only lady in the waiting room. There were about 16 guys and just us 2 girls. I took my mugshot and was taken with the lady to get searched. I begged the officer to not touch my breast, and she did. I was taken to another cell. I was by myself and there was a phone in there with bondsman numbers and whatnot. I was trying to call my mom, but it wasn't going through. There was an officer walking back and forth, and every time I tried talking to her, she ignored me. I decided I was going to get her attention by exposing my breast. When I did that, those guys from before from outside the door acted like they haven't seen a breast before. The officer got so angry and covered the window with the trash bag. That's when everything just went crazy. I laid down on that dirty-ass floor and started kicking the door. I was screaming that I was going to kill myself. At that moment, I felt like a child. Next thing I remember was being in the observation room. I was so scared because this room was exactly what my mom described when I was a kid and being bad. It was a crazy house where there's nothing but a hole in the floor to pee in. I was completely naked with nothing but a gross stuffed blanket. At this point, I was seeing shadow people. These people were my family. The 2 taller ones was my mom and sister. The other 2 were my kids. I was trying to get them to let me out. I ended up getting a hold of my younger daughter in the blanket and was rocking back and forth telling her it was okay. I started hearing my dad talking to me, telling me I did something bad and I need to fix it. I have never talked to my dad in my life, so I don't know how I was talking to him. I believed him. I was crying and telling my daughter I am so sorry. Every so often, someone would open the small window and ask if I was okay, and before I'd say anything, they would shut it. I started reliving my assaults as a child in early 20s. It was playing over and over. I felt like a 5-year-old again. I completely forgot about this stuff, and I thought what I did remember was a movie or something. These flashbacks made me remember what I was making myself forget. Out of nowhere, a lady opened the door and told me I am leaving. I screamed and cried and told them I can't go to Mexico. I don't know Spanish. She grabbed me. The next thing I remember was being in a little room with medical stuff. They took my mouth swab and was trying to take my fingerprints. I kept moving my hands for them to not get it, but the lady death gripped my hand to get a good reading. Next thing I remember was standing in a hallway with one door behind me and one door ahead of me. They told me to walk through the doors. I was so confused because it couldn't have been that easy. I was terrified that behind those doors was a firing squad. I spent about 10 minutes in that hallway until that same lady yelled and told me if I don't leave, they will make me leave. I opened the door and I thought I was in New York. I was so confused. There were people walking around and they looked at me as if I was crazy. I heard my name and looked over, and my boyfriend and his sister were running across the street. I fell to my knees and cried. I got into the car and they were asking me what happened. I thought they were recording my answers. I thought the radio was talking to me. The colors of the building were beautiful. I thought they were the way home. Next, I remember being at home and my sister-in-law was asking me who my kids were and pointing at the pictures. I didn't know their names, but I knew their colors. I was really in love with colors. My boyfriend tried to get me to lay down and rest. I thought it was code for him to kill me. I was scared to lay down. Then I thought he was my abuser when I was 5 to 10 years old. I said, "Oh, we have to do this again?" And I said my abuser's name. He was confused and I started taking off all my clothes and crying. He told me to stop and I then told him I'm going to jump out the window, and I got past him and hit out the screen. I remember I was hiding from 2 police officers behind my bed. I was telling them that I'm not going to Mexico again. I got a huge amount of energy and started eating the candy on the TV stand. I remembered that candy makes me sick, so I spit it all out in my hand and threw it at the cops. Then I remember being in the cop car and I got so scared about the AC not being on, but they were really nice to me and told me it's on. I was talking shit to one of the cops and telling him that he's cheating on his wife. They pretty much just laughed and told me to relax. They took me to a mental hospital. I could see my boyfriend and his sister talking to the officers, and I was screaming for him and hitting the car window, but he didn't hear me. They took me in a room. I was back at a young age and started flipping over the chairs and just was full of energy. Soon someone came in and told me to take a seat, and someone else was at the door taking notes. I screamed at the lady taking notes and told her to get the fuck out. When I did this, a bunch of other people came in. One of the people that came in was so handsome. He was tall and had long curly hair. I was amazed by his looks. They told me to sit down and relax and they are going to help me. I sat down just amazed at him. I told him he looked like Moana. They gave me an antipsychotic shot. He disappeared. I'm still not sure if he was real or not. I then was told to get dressed and take a pee test. That's when I found out I had meth in my system. I lost it because the only thing I was down to do was weed. The nurse who was with me told me mistakes like that happen all the time. I know she was just trying to keep me calm. After this, I was walked with a man who was lecturing me about being sober for my kids and doing better. He let me in this room where there were about 10 recliner chairs, and every single one was covered in white blankets. I screamed that everyone was dead and to take me back. I thought this was a process of death. I sat in the room. I don't remember much until I was led into another room, and it was full of people. I asked for a phone and they gave it to me. I called my mom to come and get me, and she just kept telling me she can't. I would hang up on her, walk around the room, and call her again. I did this more times for me to count. She would still answer and say the same thing. Next, I was in a ward. I was terrified because everyone was in recovering of hardcore drugs. I was sharing a room with a lady. My brain was telling me she was my neighbor who drugged me. I told her in a very serious voice that I know what she did and I will never forgive her for it. I'm pretty sure I scared her and she sat up in her bed with her back against the wall. The next morning we were eating and I was scared to eat. I thought they were poisoning me. A very nice patient that was sitting next to me asked me what was wrong. I told him I'm not going to eat because it's poisonous. He told me that I need to eat or else I won't go home. He then grabbed one of my foods and took a bite out of it and said, "See, nothing's wrong with this." I'm really grateful for this guy because he really looked after me. I truly hope he's doing good. I was so out of it, I don't even remember his name. My favorite time of the day was when my boyfriend would come to visit. I always asked him if he was there to take me home. He would say no. He always looked so tired and sad. I would try to cheer him up by playing cards or something. I hated when he had to leave. I felt very kid-like when he was visiting. After about 8 days, I was released. I was diagnosed with bipolar and was put on a bunch of meds. I really struggled with this experience. The hospital referred me to a counselor. After about a year and 3 counselors later, I found out I was misdiagnosed. My psychosis was because of me getting off my meds too fast and being drugged with something I've never tried before. My brain just freaked out. I actually have bipolar disorder and I didn't need to be on all the medication I was on. I still deal with this every day. This happened in 2018 and I am still in therapy. My relationship went to shit. We are still together, but we did break up a bunch. Life's okay now. I am diagnosed as SMI and I'm seeking Social Security disability insurance. Wish me luck. My takeaway to this is to follow your gut. You never know someone truly, and most importantly, forgive yourself. Let's just start out saying I have a history of mental health issues. I'm a 19-year-old female with a cocktail of issues including autism, ADHD, bipolar, and borderline personality disorder. Last year I lost everything, became homeless, and addicted to DXM. I moved out of my parents' house at 18 with an online friend, became homeless within 4 months due to falling out of friendships with people. I started abusing DXM when I couldn't get weed and became addicted to it and would do insane amounts to get as high as possible till I didn't know where or who I was anymore. I eventually moved in with someone else online, this time a boyfriend. He was fat and unattractive, but I was basically giving him my body for weed and alcohol as he was 21 and I had just turned 19. I ended up moving in with another online friend just 1 month later due to his house being infested with roaches with no internet and the fact that I was blackout drunk every night. This other friend ended up becoming a girlfriend after less than a week, and she was my entire world. Her mom kicked me out again 1 month later due to me overdosing on DXM and screaming that I was dying, seizing on her living room floor. This was my first overdose, and it felt like I was living multiple lives. Not just human lives, but the lives of animals too. I had admitted myself to a psych ward after her mother and brother screamed at me, telling me it's time to go to the hospital because I was sobbing, cutting my leg with my spiked collar, and I screamed and ran out of her house and walked 5 miles barefoot and collapsed under an overpass where Good Samaritans picked me up and drove me to the psych ward where I was admitted for 2 weeks. I cut my arm with a rusty wire I found in the outside area to stay 3 extra days so I could leave on the same day as another patient since she offered for me to sleep on her couch. Yet another patient I had met in there came and picked me up from the other patient's house since I had to sleep on a flea-infested couch with starving cats that wouldn't let me sleep, and I ended up staying with that other person in a spare bedroom in their trailer for 2 months. This is when I started abusing Robotabs. I took 100 pills, 30 milligrams each, in 10 days, binging every day and smoking weed out of a bong and hitting a dab pen on top of it. The first few days I would trip really hard while my roommate was gone. I would paint my face with clown makeup and dance to EDM music while I was alone. These trips soon turned into a sort of ritual for me. Instead of clown makeup, I would put on corpse paint, and instead of dancing to EDM, I would light candles and almost do a sort of ballet to depressive suicidal black metal, which is not a very healthy choice of music to listen to while tripping. I would start crying while tripping and would lay on the floor for hours, quietly sobbing, wishing I was dead. Getting high had turned into another form of self-harm for me. On the 10th day, I hadn't slept in 2 nights and was entering a psychosis state. I had slowly started to become convinced I was an angel and God was speaking to me, telling me the rapture was beginning and the world was going to end. I felt my personality start to completely break down until I didn't know who I was or where I was anymore. I had scrolled through my 10,000 plus Google photos every morning after I woke up to try and remind myself who I was. Scrolling through all the pictures I had taken of myself, my friends, screenshots of conversations, all distant memories of a person who no longer existed in this body. I had started seeing tiny rainbow sparkles, orbs and halos everywhere, flooding my vision, no matter if it was light or dark, inside or outside. I was making strange thought connections in my head, connecting things that weren't connected, like lyrics and songs and certain things people said in my YouTube videos I would watch, or certain messages people would send me that would all send chills down my spine, making me think I was being communicated with telepathically about the end of the world. I began genuinely believing there was a community of angels who could telepathically communicate with each other, and I was one of them. I had died from an overdose, and they were trying to communicate in any way possible to get me to realize I was dead, and that this world was fake. I was watching an interview with the rapper I really enjoy on YouTube known as Black Cray, and his whole aesthetic is being a thug angel, and I was drawing so many different connections in my head, and I began genuinely believing he was God and was speaking to me through the interview. I had started becoming extremely paranoid and would look out my window staring at anyone who would walk past my trailer, and I had started to become convinced they were walking in patterns, at the same time and same place every day because they were hired to watch me. Then I began thinking my roommate was hired to watch me too. I was convinced my current online boyfriend I met on Instagram was secretly my roommate this whole time, as I have a bad habit of getting in online relationships with people without them showing me their face, and this was one of them. I was absolutely terrified and disgusted. Somehow my mental stability had started breaking down completely, and all I could think was about how gross my roommate was for pretending to be someone else online to flirt with me. I then began wondering why he would do this, and the thought came to me. My roommate was a self-proclaimed Satanist. I never thought anything much of it, but he was very goth and had serial killer memorabilia all over his house, which made me realize that he was doing this because he intended to kill me. I started dreading him coming home from work as I couldn't get the thoughts out of my head. This is it. You're going to die. The entire world is going to end because he is going to kill you. My intrusive thoughts played off of each other and increased each other's paranoid effects, rabbit-holing myself into a schizophrenic-like state. I realized the whole neighborhood was in on it. Every person who lived in my neighborhood was an actor hired by the government to watch me and my roommate because my roommate was a serial killer and I was his bait. It was just like the movie The Truman Show. My roommate had come home from work and I could barely keep my composure, and after hitting his weed pen one more time, my mind completely broke. He had told me, jokingly or not, I'm not sure to this day if I hallucinated it. He had told me he was going to take me to the Satanic Temple. This triggered me to run out of the trailer as fast as I possibly could into someone's front yard when a tree started talking to me. It was asking me what's wrong and what I was doing. I was so caught off guard that a tree in someone's yard was speaking to me. I didn't realize it was an old woman. She was asking me what's wrong, and I started trying to explain myself that my roommate was trying to kill me and they were taken aback and couldn't really believe me. I saw my roommate walking out of our trailer and I took off again, running as fast as possible, yelling, "He's gonna kill me! He's gonna kill me!" And I ran into someone's backyard and knocked on their sliding door to get them to call the police since I was so legitimately convinced everyone was an actor, including the people I was asking for help. I tried subliminally messaging the cops after they arrived with my mind, not realizing they weren't on my side. I realized a being was communicating with me through the leaves in the trees, writing words in the branch and leaf patterns for me to respond to the police as they asked me questions. I saw the word black form in the branches and leaves when they asked me what color his shirt was. There was definitely someone on my side here, looking out for me, sending me psychic messages. Was it God? Was it my ex-girlfriend? Aliens? I had no clue. All I knew at that time was I was in serious deep shit, and someone or something was trying to save my life. Then all of time stopped. I was rolled into an ambulance and it felt like I had died. It felt like I had always been here in this ambulance, that all of time had began and ended with me in this ambulance. As the EMT started talking to me, something about the way they asked their questions made me believe they were federal agents trying to get information out of me. They told me this was a special hospital, and I immediately thought they were talking about a hospital for psychics, and that I was a psychic, and a secret society had infiltrated the government's ranks in order to save me from my roommate. But then they took my blood. I was convinced the nurse taking my blood was a vampire who got off from taking my blood and was going to drink it as soon as she left the room. They made me change into a gown with sparkles on it, just like the ones I've been seeing everywhere. I then tried to call my mom, but for some reason, I still don't know if this was a hallucination or not. When she picked up, I asked her if she was there, and the phone just repeated back what I just said back to me in my own voice. And for some reason, this made me believe my mom had killed herself. She had killed herself because of me. The government told her I was dead, or maybe actually did die, and she had killed herself from the grief. After a while, they had transferred me to an inpatient facility, which I was convinced was being run by a satanic Freemason cult, the same one my roommate was a part of. I identified all the patients and staff by the color of their clothes. Red was a Freemason leader, black meant top-ranking occultist, pink and purple were lower-ranking occultist, and green was an initiate, or as I called them, snakes. They had given me a green pair of scrubs to wear, and I believed this was them initiating me into the cult. They wanted me because I had psychic abilities. I genuinely deeply believed that from the amount of DXM and weed I had taken on my binge, I had gained psychic powers like Eleven from Stranger Things. I even could have sworn I saw one of the actors from the show playing the role of a nurse in my hospital instead of the character they played on the show. I started writing down nonsensical words, letters, numbers, phrases, and ciphers on the walls and tables in my room and the day room of the ward. Things relating to conspiracies I had never believed in my life, like when I wrote Black Satellite, which was referring to the satellite orbiting our Earth responsible for filtering out any conversation about Hitler being alive on the moon. This is because on top of believing half the staff were psychic Freemason Satanists, they were neo-Nazis too. So conspiracies relating to Hitler were flowing through my mind. Maybe he was the one who sent me here. This entire time, I did not realize I was in a psych ward or a hospital at all. I was convinced this was some sort of prison for people who know the truth about our reality being fake, or even a facility specifically made to just hold me and no one else. That the patients were in on it too. They were actors, just like the staff. A few days went by and I started genuinely believing that snipers were steadily aiming at my forehead through the window in the day room of the ward. They were trying to teach me to control the TV with my mind, change the channel, change the numbers on the back of a football player's shirt, make a character in a movie say something not on the script, move the tennis ball with your mind. I really believed I was doing all these things, and I started whacking my arms back and forth when tennis would play to control the tennis ball physically, like I was playing Wii Sports. The other patients looked at me like I was insane, because at that moment, I really was insane. I had never been this paranoid or delusional once in my entire life. I had truly lost my mind, and I didn't even know it. After a week, I started to believe the hospital was a spaceship, and I had to find a certain button sequence hidden through bumps on the walls, screws in the door hinges, and windows. I would press my whole hand against a landline's keypad to signal to aliens to come and pick me up. It took 2 weeks of this mindset and 2 shots in my ass of antipsychotics after mentally breaking and screaming, sobbing in the lunchroom, screaming, "I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to play this game anymore. Please stop. Just fucking stop. I just don't want to play anymore." I had completely lost it. After a few days of getting shot in the ass with antipsychotics, I had finally started to come down from my trip and realize who and where I was. The delusions and paranoia were so extreme and so long-lasting that I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder during my stay there. It took me over 2 weeks to come down and realize I was tripping dick and balls this entire time. I had no idea your mind could break like this for this long, just from something you can get on Amazon for under $30. It's been over half a year since this has happened to me, and since then I've overdosed a few more times and been admitted to psych wards, but none of those times did I ever get to the level I was in this trip. It was found that I do not have schizoaffective or any other type of schizoid disorder, and that all of this was the effects of the substances. Please be extremely careful if you decide to binge DXM, especially when you're mixing it with weed or alcohol. This was the lowest point in my entire life, and I don't want anyone to ever have to go through what I did. I'll try to keep this as coherent as I can, but it was a very confusing and terrifying time in my life. In 2014, I'd been on a 2-month Xanax binge doing up to 10 bars a day and also buying a lot of the pure powder off the dark net. I also occasionally, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, was shooting up Dilaudid, morphine, and Roxys. I couldn't say how much because I was blacked out from the Xanax most of the time. I hardly remembered this part, but this is how I ended up in jail. My main dealer called me up and asked me to help him rob this place, a credit union of all things. I can't believe I agreed to this, but I am a complete idiot on Xanax. He gave me some bars and I drove him to the bank and parked behind it. He got out with an airsoft pistol tucked in his pants, a note to give the teller, and sunglasses and a hat. He came back like 15 minutes later and we took off. He told me he had only gotten about $800. He lied obviously, so he only gave me 200 and like 50 bars or something. A few weeks later, I'm coming home from work early because I was getting sick and needed to get my rig and shoot some morphine I had. The cops were waiting for me when I got home. I dropped my pills under the seat and stepped out, got handcuffed, blah blah blah. Later on, I'm being interrogated by a detective. I hardly remember this part, but I think she basically told me these lies about my friends selling me out, and I broke down and told her everything, like an idiot. This is where I lose my shit. My memory is very fragmented and mixed up. I'm taken to the county jail and first put into the drunk tank, I believe. There were 5 other guys and it was incredibly hot. I remember seeing one guy with these black sticky things all over his body that he was pulling off, and I later came to believe he was a robot for some reason. I moved to the general cell they put everyone in for booking. I lose my mind in there. I believe a combination of intense social anxiety and coming off of my daily massive Xanax habit caused me to lose my mind at this point. This cell was roughly 20 feet by 10 feet in a strange triangle shape. There was one toilet and a window looking out into the booking area. The worst part was that it was crammed with people. I believe I counted up to 30 or 40 people at one point. I was in this cell for roughly 3 days of pure hell. It felt like weeks I was stuck in a time loop, living events over and over. I cannot begin to describe the intense anxiety I felt being crammed in the cell with all these people I didn't know, and not knowing what my life was about to become. There were these 3 black guys that were part of some gang, and they were loud as shit. Their yelling and screaming drove me insane. They were constantly snorting this coke or meth they had brought in, so they were always awake, always loud as hell. I just crouched down in a corner and tried not to be noticed. I was also terrified of using the toilet in front of all these people, so I held it in for 2 days, I believe. And on the 3rd day, I couldn't hold it in anymore and finally took a massive dump and piss, but I was so out of it, I am not sure if it actually happened or not. I began to have delusions that I was actually at my house and watching this and other movies on Netflix. I became convinced that we were all defective programs in a giant computer called the world, and that we were in a spaceship waiting for the day that someone could fix us. I began to think that I was the one that would fix everyone. I started to see everyone as different versions of me who had all taken different paths in life that had ended them up here. I began to cry. I felt deep empathy for everyone here. I wanted things to be different, for everything to be right. One of the guys there realized there was something wrong with me, I suppose, and he was telling me to just close my eyes and imagine myself somewhere else, and that I could be anywhere I wanted. I believed him, but the most I could accomplish when closing my eyes was for the obnoxious sounds to disappear and to be in an empty space, which was alright. I wouldn't last though, and soon I was back in the cell. I was having crazy mood swings between laughing and crying, feeling intense empathy for everyone there. I blacked out for a bit and came to in a cell by myself. It was very small with barely enough room to walk in a circle and a shower in the corner which didn't work. There were strange things written on the wall. I remember one thing already there was a window in the back corner that was covered with what looked like white paint, and it said you don't want to see what's on the other side of this. A bit creepy. I had to take a shit so badly, I banged on the door for hours until a guard came and asked me what the fuck I wanted. I told him I needed to use the bathroom badly, and he told me I had one right there and pointed to the shower. With no options left, I began to have this delusion that I was a woman from a camera crew that was sent to document the inhumane conditions in the jail, but I had accidentally been locked in a cell and forgotten about. I couldn't get anyone to let me out, so I eventually gave in and did the most shameful thing I have ever done in my life. At least it feels that way to me. I pulled down my pants and shit in the shower, also pissed. I had many delusions, too many to write here. I know this is already going on too long and nobody's going to read this. I was seeing things on the wall like comic strips, Japanese kanji, Gundam drawings, admiring artwork of past prisoners that wasn't really there. At one point, I thought Cylons from Battlestar Galactica were invading and killing everyone. Someone whispered through my door to stay there and keep low. Lasers shot through the wall and left scorch marks all over the cell. I narrowly avoided them by hiding in the shower next to all the shit and piss. I imagined there was a little girl there that had teleported in there somehow. She left through the door and I looked outside and saw a guard open her head up, and there was a machine there instead of a brain. He reprogrammed her or something. I have no idea. I eventually got dressed out, with everyone laughing at me for smelling like piss and shit and having crazy eyes, dilated pupils I assume. I had a visit from my parents, and it was the most emotional and traumatizing thing. I was delirious. I hated for them to see me that way. I remember asking them how long I'd been there, and they told me 3 days. I was stunned. It had felt like weeks and weeks to me. I lived so many different lives and delusions during those few days, repeating over and over. I was moved to a different jail and was still packed in a small cell with tons of guys, everyone telling me how bad I smelled. I was seeing Shrek doing gymnastics in all the reflective surfaces I looked at. I signed a paper. I swear I thought it had said some random person had bonded me out, and I was put in a different cell by myself again, once again for a long period of time with no bathroom. I believe I was on suicide watch in retrospect. I finally came back to myself, perhaps a week later, but I didn't feel myself again for months. It was absolutely terrible. I was released after a year there on 6 years probation. I'm about to go back on probation violation most likely, and I'm going to have to go through a 3 to 4 gram a day phenibut and a 3-day-a-week heroin withdrawal. Also 3 grams a day of gabapentin. I'm hoping it's not nearly as bad as the first time. Update, January 4th, 2017, 12:01 a.m. I'm amazed this thread got so much attention. I go to court in the morning, Wednesday the 4th. I'll let everyone know how it goes and respond to some more comments when I feel up to it. At the moment, I'm too filled with anxiety to want to talk about this much more. I hope you can understand. It's no guarantee I'm going to jail. It's just that I've been having some issues with my probation officer lately. The charge I'm currently going to court for is trespassing, and it was a BS charge that is definitely going to be dropped. I'm just worried I'll go there and they'll tell me, "Oh hey, you have a warrant for your arrest. Please step back here to the booking area." I am also planning on getting an appointment with a psychiatrist so I can perhaps get some help with my social anxiety, which is what's making everything so much harder for me. I'm not much more than a shut-in at this point. You only see me on the days I'm high enough to feel like I can interact with people. I know I can't carry on living like this, especially while I'm on such a strict probation. I'm sorry if I triggered some people, compelling them to say I'm what's wrong with this subreddit with my junky horror stories and shit attitude. I'm a human being with many problems. I hope you can understand that I'm doing the best I can, even if that best is floundering around like a fish out of water, so keep the negative comments to a minimum, please. If I avoid jail time this time, I'm going to get my shit together, at least concerning my PO, so that I can take that monkey off my back at least. Wish me luck, friends. Update number 2, after court. Court went well. If I don't get into any trouble for 6 months, they dismissed the case. The charge was trespassing. I drove a friend of mine to a used everything store that I had been banned from for shoplifting video games, not exactly a pawn shop. I waited in the car for him. Suddenly a cop knocked on my window asking me to get out. Somehow, a security guy there had recognized my car and called the police. We talked. I told him about my probation and how I didn't go into the store, only sat in my car. The cop asked him if he wanted to press charges, and he said yes, even though I had just told him how I could potentially spend 6 years in prison for his dickness. So this guy never shows in court, so I'm not going to be charged with it. Now I need to work things out with my PO because I've missed 2 months of appointments because I was afraid of failing the drug test because of some pot I had smoked and some Valium I've been taking. She hasn't tried to call me at all, and I've left 3 messages for her. I think she has either forgotten about me or thinks I'm in rehab. I need to get clean and set up an appointment and come with a good excuse for missing them. She's a very nice old lady who I've always been honest to about my drug problems, and she's never taken my probation seriously, even though I'm on the highest level below house arrest. My anxiety over seeing her is insane. I don't think I can do it sober, and I may end up using a legal benzo to talk to her. Problem is, they are often too strong, and I turn into a klepto asshole on most like a Tizalam. Maybe a small dose of something right before I go in to see her. This is my first time talking to anyone about this. My experience with Bromo-DragonFLY happened in 2011. I was 17 years old at the time, and I had only smoked weed and drank alcohol. I was one of those teenagers that got really excited about psychedelics. I read a lot of trip reports from different forums and watched some cheap documentaries about LSD. I mainly got excited about the visual effects, because usually those are somewhat easier to describe in trip reports. All those colors, all the weird shapes, and maybe some visions. I really wanted to experience all that. Now here's where things went wrong. I decided that I wanted to try out LSD. It had to be LSD. Don't know why, maybe because of all those documentaries were mainly about acid. I tried to buy it that summer, but I got scammed, which of course made me very frustrated. It wasn't very easy to get such drugs from the country where I live, especially as a teenager. So, a few weeks after the scam, I was offered Bromo-DragonFLY, which according to my friend was even stronger than LSD. I was more than happy to buy it. Hey, it's on a piece of paper, so it at least looks like LSD. What could go wrong? A friend of mine, let's call him John, decided to do the Bromo-DragonFLY with me, and we took it at my friend's house. His mother was out of town, so we had the house for the 2 of us with no worry. We took the Bromo-DragonFLY on Friday afternoon. We had prepared a lot of things, interesting foods, paper to write things down, some LED lights, psychedelic music, etc. We both had really bad anticipation anxiety after taking the blotters, but nothing happened for over an hour. The only time we used any of all the things we had prepared were while waiting for anything to start happening. When it must have started to kick in, I remember that John all of a sudden remembered that he hadn't eaten much, so maybe it would be a good idea to eat something before the effects would get strong. I remember feeling like everything was much brighter than normal in my vision. I sat down with John to the kitchen with paper and a pen. John had a big bowl of spaghetti. Then both of us started to have these loops. Not sure, of course, about the neurological effects here, but I think our short-term memory was shutting down almost at the same time. This is how the first loop would go. I tried to draw something, but I got distracted by the table and how weird it looked. John would say, "Oh shit, it's kicking in. Everything looks weird." We would laugh, but feel a bit weird or scared. Then I would remind John that he should eat the spaghetti now before it got more intense. Then John would stare at me and ask, "Hey, did we just have this conversation before?" And I would realize and then say out loud, "What the fuck? We did have this conversation." Then the loop would start again and again and again. At some point, both of us were very frustrated because even though you forgot everything, the moments when you realized that you were in a loop, you would also remember that it had happened many times already. It just felt like absolute madness. The first big loop ended only at a mindfuck moment when after reminding John once again to eat the spaghetti, we realized that the bowl was empty. Somehow that broke the spell. We both got up laughing and being happy that it was over. But it was only the beginning. It hadn't even started yet. It would go on for 2 days. At this point, I won't include all the loops, but I would only say that most of the things I experienced happened to me lots of times. I would forget and experience or feel things again, feel the hopeless realization that it was just happening over and over again, and then forget once more. The next thing I remember is looking at myself from the mirror and having no idea who was staring back at me. Actually, the face made no sense to me. It had movement, a lot of movement. I remember thinking about Harry Potter Polyjuice, and what I was seeing was like some Polyjuice glitch. The face would not take any shape. Somehow it wasn't so scary to see my mirror image like that, because I could at least somehow know it was me. But when sometime later I realized that John's face was like that too, it got scary. At that time, it also started to get more intense. At one point, I could see the normal world, but all of a sudden, these visions would swallow me. And all the colors, no colors, black and white, only black and white. And everything felt violent, jagged, and grainy. Actually, many of those tales from the trip thumbnails almost give me flashbacks. I would see horrific human beings with mangled body parts or faces. I had visions of me fighting some weird black and white creature that would eat me. I remember seeing my body getting disassembled, or at least I thought it looked like that. The most vivid vision that repeated all the time was the Labyrinth. This black and white fourth-dimensional sharp-edged labyrinth that would change its shape all the time. Sometimes I saw it as the wall in the house we were in. Sometimes I was in the labyrinth. Sometimes I was part of the labyrinth. Sometimes I saw under the labyrinth, and under it was pure white, nothing. I was in hell, and just to remind you, it was a hell I would forget over and over again. So I would experience it like I had never experienced it before. Terror. It was absolute terror. In between those visions, there was the real world, but only for moments, and just to experience other loops. Nothing there made any sense either. To be honest, I'm not sure what was real and what was not, but I remember that sometimes one of us would realize a loop quicker than the other. So all of a sudden, John would say what I was about to say next, which was almost more upsetting than the actual loop was. At some point, we had decided to go to John's bed and just lay down, try to sleep, but there was no ability to sleep in this nightmare. I remember many times that one of us would switch the lights off and then maybe sometime later put them back on. It made no difference. We must have laid in that bed from Friday night until Sunday morning. I don't at least remember getting up. Saturday was mostly that labyrinth. On Saturday, I didn't remember anymore that I had taken something. I remember being in that labyrinth and either I said or someone else said that, "You're dead, and this is how it is." That sentence would just repeat, and I would feel absolute terror. I was not sure if there had been anything else besides this madness. On Saturday, I actually was not sure at all that it was John who was next to me in those non-vision moments. Our biggest loop in the whole experience was seeing a stranger with no face and being scared until you got the courage to have a conversation with this faceless thing. "So, you're John?" "Yeah, and you're Sam?" "That's me." "Yeah, it is. I think something has happened and we are in a loop. Yes, we have said this all before, but at least you are with me." Then we would hold hands. It was the only nice, safe thing during the whole terror-driven experience. In that moment, I felt that someone else was with me, at least for a moment, until it was all forgotten and happened again. During Saturday through Sunday night, I was able to fall asleep. When I woke up, everything was almost normal. My thoughts were not in a loop, and I could only see almost a residue of that labyrinth, but it didn't bother me because I was so happy to feel normal. I must have said something because John walked into the room with a zebra print blanket on him. I could see his face. He told me about his vision, and it was at least as horrifying as mine. There was a knife in the room on his bookshelf, and he had seen it, and in his vision, he had stabbed himself over and over again with it. Of course, at some point, he wasn't any more sure if he had died, and his death was just playing on the loop for some reason. Can't imagine how that must have felt, although basically it was the same shit in, different package. I also talked about my experience as best as I could. We were both mentally broken, but glad it was over. But it wasn't. When John walked off the room with the zebra blanket, it turned into the Labyrinth. I was mortified. I cried. I cried many times during that day. Luckily, that was the last clear effect I had, but the residue never went away. At first, I was so tired and messed up that I didn't really even think about the residue effects in my vision, but at some point, it started to really bother me. So, it has been 13 years since, and I still have it. I can see it, the Labyrinth, even now when I am writing this. I do see other shapes and colors. Sometimes my vision goes to full white for a few seconds, but most of the time it's the residue. This whole thing ruined a lot in my life. I was very anxious about my vision, and of course, I went to see a doctor about it. I also felt depressed and anxious, so they gave me a lot of meds. They couldn't really figure out what was going on because I was not psychotic, and all seemed fine physically. I was a very coherent, young, maybe stupid teenager, but I had this interference. It was diagnosed as depression with psychotic features. They even tested out some pretty strong antipsychotic medicine on me, but it did nothing. 2021 was the year when I met a doctor that knew what was actually going on. I had HPPD, hallucinogen persisting perception disorder. They even did some pretty interesting tests on me and found out with fMRI scan that I have some abnormal action in my visual cortex. We tried some medicine which didn't work, so basically I've just come to terms with it. It just helps to have a diagnosis, a name. I think you get used to anything eventually, and after 13 years, I don't really even know what a normal vision is. I can't even imagine it because I see interference, eyes closed, eyes open, all the time. This is my reality now. To be honest, it isn't so bad. I can't drive a car because of those white blind moments. No way I'm driving on a highway while having those, but otherwise, my life is normal. I've learned that there are actually a lot of people that have HPPD. A lot of people are born with it, and it seems like there are different levels of it. Most people with HPPD have the mildest form. Some even might think that it's how a vision should be if they were born with it. Then there can be very strong cases, where a person has a very difficult time concentrating on anything and must use sunglasses all the time because your vision is sensitized to normal light. I think I'm in the middle of those, and I can live with it. At least I didn't have to stay in that labyrinth, even if I can see it.